Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have ENFPs or ENFP react to INTJ's thoughts on ENFPs. And we are expecting a few ENFPs to show up throughout this chat, but we never know. So, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Chris. I run the YouTube channel AsuraPsych. I'm a certified MBTI practitioner, a Bachelor's of Science graduate student in psychology. I like MBTI and type. I'm an INTJ. I type as a 5-wing 4 in Enneagram, but I'm not so sure about that. We'll see. But anyway, yeah, that's me.
Cool. LiJo, would you like to tell us a bit?
Hi, I'm Lindsay, or LiJo is my channel. YouTuber, a studier of typology, and business owner. INTJ 5-wing 4 last time I checked. So
a lot of 5-wing 4s. And so Heidi?
So far I'm the only ENFP. My name's Heidi. I do a lot of writing in the MBTI space. I do have a YouTube channel. I only have like 3 videos as of now though. And I test as 8-wing 7 in the Enneagram.
Yeah, and this is one of her books. This is me letting you go. Highly recommend. And so, Michael, would you like to tell us a bit about you?
Yeah, Michael, INTJ, 5-wing 4, and the only non-YouTuber here, but that'll change soon. So I'll have something up by the time this video is posted. So because I need to set a deadline for myself and stop working on this thing.
Yes, Michael is part filmmaker, and so his YouTube videos will be really high quality. As are all the YouTubers in here too. They're extremely high quality videos. AsuraPsych and Lindsay have fantastic INTJ channels that you should check out in the links below. I'm Joyce, and I'm a certified MBTI practitioner, and let's get this show on the road. And so, INTJs, what are your thoughts on ENFPs?
Personally, ENFPs are actually like one of my very favorite types to talk to. A lot of my closest friends are usually ENFPs. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I kind of mentioned before that we started this that I have 2 EFP sisters. So maybe I just like that kind of energy, but I like the very spontaneous, energetic energy that the EFPs bring. But unlike the ETPs, I don't find myself arguing with EFPs very often. And I enjoy that. So there's just this very playful, intuitive kind of conversation going on.
Yeah, for myself as well, definitely one of my favorite types. It seems to be people who I find myself around who naturally gravitate towards me have been ENFPs throughout my life. And just so creative. I really admire their creativity, just so open-minded but grounded in a lot of things in life, so unfazed by a lot of things that a lot of people get really other people stirred up, and I find that their sense of just like childlike wonder in life to be really inspiring. So
yeah, and I think there's kind of an exhaustion that comes from constantly trying to justify and explain yourself to people, and that's not part of the INTJ ENFP dynamic typically, because we're both kind of oddball types. And one thing I was thinking about was that we both have a tendency to kind of disappear for stretches at a time. So it's like, I always feel the need to apologize for that. But since like INTJs and ENFPs do it, because I'll get lost in like something I'm working on and just not keep in touch with anybody. ENFPs will go off chasing something that's interesting. And then you come back together and there's not that like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't, because it's like, this is what we do.
This is turning into a compliment session for you.
Yeah, I was like, this is great. Can I get a compliment back? What's my role here?
She's just going to be like, yeah, I don't like INTJs. No.
No, that was all so spot on in my opinion. Like, I feel the same things in reverse. I love what you said about, Michael, about ENFPs and INTJs both disappearing for a while, because I've definitely noticed that. Like, a lot of the long-term friendships that I maintain over my life have been with INTJs, because neither of us are offended by that kind of disappearing and reappearing. Like, it's very natural. And there's also a sense of what we're doing isn't as important as what we're thinking about. So I can just call up an INTJ friend I haven't seen in like a year or two, and it doesn't matter. Like, we don't have to catch up on the stuff. We can just kind of talk about what we're thinking about, or what's going, like what we're researching lately. And like, I have INTJ friends who I'm like, I don't know where they live right now. They don't know where I live, but like I've talked to them and I know what's going through their heads. And I love that. Like, I love that it's kind of this very detached from real life relationship in a lot of ways, because we both are types that live in our heads in kind of different ways. And I totally agree that there's a sense of kind of natural, it's almost very weird being an ENFP, because you don't meet that many people who think very similarly to you. And then when I meet INTJs, I'm like, you're so different from me in the way you live, but there's just such a natural connection. Like, I just feel like they can see inside my brain in a way that no other type really honestly can, including other ENFPs a lot of the time. So it tends to be a very natural, like, mental click, which is awesome.
Yeah, and they're really grounding too, because INTJs, they can just like TE pick a possibility, and ENFPs can like generate it. And it takes away the stress of narrowing down that ENFPs might have, because the INTJ can just go like this. Now that we've gotten our compliments in this conversation, I was wondering, what are the challenges in the INTJ and ENFP duo?
Like, I have like some things, but I'm like, is that the type itself, or just like people I know of that type who do that? And I don't want to like generalize it too much. Some ENFPs that I know have this tendency of blaming things on their, like, that happened in their past on or the circumstances that I wouldn't say actually were the reasons that they fell into that problem. So I know, for example, ENFPs who like will get out of a relationship, and during the entire time they were in that relationship, they were like, oh, this is the best relationship I've ever had, and this is my true love, and all this and that. And then they leave that relationship, and then immediately that's the worst person they've ever dated. Like, it's just, there's just like this complete 180 flip, and they'll blame that person or some sort of situation there for that, I don't know, for that situation. And it, as an outsider looking in, it's like, I don't think you entirely saw what really happened, or maybe you're misinterpreting, but that could just be the ENFPs I know.
Yeah, maybe there's like degrees of health, and that would be like at the lower level. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's also can be really related to Enneagram for ENFPs too, because I feel like there's this very funny divide between like different ENFPs and how they handle their FI, in that some of them have a really strong feeling of like everything's happening to me, and that's kind of when you get that sense of like, okay, if things are working out for me, it's just because I'm a genius. If they're not working out, it's not my fault. There can be like, I think with any FI user, there can be a risk of kind of victim complex thinking in certain areas if they're not very self-aware. And then I think, especially when you're dealing with like any of the assertive types on the Enneagram, there's almost like an over-identification with not necessarily like flaws, but like personal responsibility. So it's like when I leave relationships, I'll almost like overestimate how much I had a negative impact, because I'm like, well, I can fix that. Like, I like to have control over what happens going forward. So it's like, I think some ENFPs can take like very growth oriented approaches, whereas others will take more, I don't know, more of like an emotional approach in a way that is probably healthy in a different way. But yeah, it could also be an FI health thing. But I see what you're saying. Like, it's like, I definitely can see that tendency in ENFPs.
So with FI users, there's a term called the repulsion switch, where like with FPs, yeah, like they really like someone, but if you like switch off their repulsion switch, they will be like repulsed at you. If you like go against a certain value, or in a relationship, it turns sour. Like, there's that value switch that can turn on and off for like the lower levels of health for an FP.
Yeah, I think it's that we connect on FI, so it's like if there's tension there, then I'm not budging, and sometimes, you know, if someone else doesn't budge, it's that weird like second and third function kind of, you know, intensity that can turn up.
Definitely. Hey, Michelle.
Hey.
Hello.
Hi. Today, we're talking about ENFPs reacting to INTJ's thoughts on ENFPs. And you are dating an INTJ, so this is very relevant.
Yes, I am.
We're talking about stubbornness right before you came in.
Oh, gosh. From both sides?
That's the real thing. Like, both types, you can probably speak to this, Michelle, if that's the relationship you're in. I definitely type to be very stubborn.
Yeah, it's just a constant battle between us of who's got the greater will. Normally it's him, though. I don't know. It depends on what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle, you missed the compliment session.
Well, that's good. There's too many compliments for ENFPs out there. So
it's the SmackDown session right now. So
heck yes.
So where do INTJs get stubborn and where do ENFPs get stubborn in this relationship dynamic? And is it with different things? Is it with the same things? Maybe the INTJs first because it's a INTJ thoughts video.
I would say that I can get stubborn with like what I consider the right way to go about doing something. Like this is the way to get the best kind of result. So if you want to start a new business or if you want to sell something, a craft, I'm like, well, if you want to sell it, like this is the best way to get that thing actually done, And so I'll kind of hold true more to like the process oriented thing. Cause it's like, I'm not involved. Like to me, it's not my subjective opinion, or at least not that I think of. And I'm like, this is just how it is to get what you want. I'm trying to help you with what you actually want, versus I think the ENFPs will be more stubborn as it relates to the things that they value, what's important to them, what they find enjoyable or not enjoyable. So they enjoy doing something a certain way. It might not matter if that's not the result. Like even if they kind of want the result, they're like, well, if I enjoy it this way and it doesn't get me that result, it kind of doesn't matter,
And that's a TE thing. I mean, I was thinking about working relationships too, because there's a couple of things. One is when something is like going wrong, I generally just want to like plow through it. And sometimes I've found that ENFPs need to like run around it for a little while. And I want to just like grab them and say like, we could just go a straight line through solving this problem. And the other thing is there's a point in working with ENFPs, and I've worked with quite a few. There's a point where I get very obsessive and focused toward the end of something, and there's a point where the ENFP wants to move on. So it's like there's a like it's not done kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Michelle, but for me, I'm like 80% done is enough done usually. So I could
exactly if even that much. If we get over that 20% initial hump, yeah. If it gets going, that's all that really matters.
Yeah,
starting it.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like with ENFPs, they're really good at starting. The follow through is like for the other person. It's like a baton pass. So the ENFP has the baton first, and then they pass it on to the other person to finish. It's the same thing for so I'm launching a website, and we had to design a logo. And so the ENFP designed half of it, gave it to me, and I was like, it's beautiful. It just needs a little bit more. And then we never got back to the logo. So it was like half done. But it was great. So your thoughts, ENFPs?
Well, refinement is not our strength. Like I do a lot of not so much anymore, but for many years I did a lot of ghostwriting, and I was always really good at the first draft. But if the client wanted edits, like I would just outsource someone to incorporate their edits, because it's like my genius zone is not in refinement. I find that really difficult actually. So I think there's ways around that. Like, it's like if you can figure out ways to just make that process work, like you said, by passing the baton and making sure it gets done, then that's a great workaround. But definitely that's where we're going to struggle and lose energy. So if you're assigning something that requires a lot of refinement to an ENFP, you're probably not going to get the best result. I can only speak for myself, but yeah.
I feel like that's perfect though. I feel like that's perfect because I'm the absolute opposite of what you just described. A first draft is such a chore. I mean, an absolute nightmare. But when you get past that point, I'm completely in the zone. So I'd say that's not even a tension between the two types. Like if you're collaborating on something, that's the perfect kind of dynamic. I feel like, I mean, I don't know if Lindsay and Chris, if you're the same.
So like when I'm working on a project, I don't have drafts. I treat the entire thing as a final draft. I did that all the way through high school. I know whenever they were like, all right, you're going to create a rough draft, you're going to brainstorm, you're going to map. I was like, no, I'm just going to start. I'm just going to get started on it, and I'll build it as I'm going and refine it as I'm working on it, and then give them the final product of that.
What I find is difficult for me and kind of, through the stage of creating something is really like, sometimes I'll have the concept that I want to convey, but I won't always know like what is a creative way to like put this together so that, people find it enjoyable. And so, sometimes the ENFPs will have these ideas of like something that seems just like so silly, but I'm like, that would actually fit perfectly into like what I was trying to do. And it's just something I wouldn't naturally just randomly come up with. And so that perspective, and sometimes it'll take me a while to get sold on it. Like I'll be like, I don't know if that's like a good idea, but then I'll be thinking about it over like a week or two, and I'll be like, actually, do you know what? If we positioned it like this and like that, then yeah, like actually it would. And then I can kind of take that piece like to completion. So I look at it as one draft as well, but sometimes like those chunks of really just like creativity, and I feel as though with my NI, I'll reorganize something to make it seem really new and like seem different, but a lot of times it's really like I'm just repurposing things in a lot of different ways to bring it in. But NE will just come with something that's so unique, and that can be really valuable to the finished product.
Yeah, NE is a really good initiator and for ingenuity for the birth of new projects, and the INTJ is great with the follow through and with the focus. Yeah.
I think a good like archetypal representation of the extroverted intuitive is like Da Vinci and his multiple projects that were, at the time out of the world and crazy, and everyone was like, what is this? And then we look at it back now and he's like, wow, he thought of like parachutes and planes and diving suits like 500 years before anyone else was going to do that.
And there's a thing about ideas where, I mean, most ideas when they first surface are incredibly stupid. like a lot of ideas are just dumb, and ENFPs are happy to just plow through that. And my instinct is just like, this is dumb. We need to like discard this thing immediately, but then you end up with something really interesting like that. That whole process is kind of just, I get really frustrated really fast when it comes to like refining an idea.
You actually mentioned something that reminded me of something I really like about INTJs, which is that, when I want to start a project, I will often run it by Tim, or I'll run it by people at work who are INTJs to get them to like rip it apart. But I always feel like I know it's a good idea when I want to do it despite the negative feedback that I get from the INTJ.
How do you feel about the feedback? Like when it's very, what do they call it? Constructive criticism? Like,
well, I think that I push myself to actively seek it out so it doesn't come to me at a time when I'm not ready for it. So that way I'm trying to be prepared. And so when I ask an INTJ about an idea, I've already thought it through enough to where I feel confident like bringing it up. And then I take it as a challenge, like all the feedback. It's like, okay, I can do that. Okay, I can address that. And let me come back and show you like what I've addressed and how I've addressed it. And then we can, continue to work it like that. I like actively working on things that have to change a lot with INTJs because that exact reason. They're really good at refining it for me. And I'm just like, all right, we'll go around this general area. And they're like, okay, here's the path through that craziness.
Something I really appreciate about working with INTJs, because I don't think I have as much direct experience as you guys do. I just kind of have like a few clients who've been INTJs. And they're really good at giving creative liberty and kind of defining boundaries, which is also where I work really well. Like if I know exactly what my role is, and then they know exactly what their role is, and we can assign kind of, it's your job to be creative over here, it's my job to be creative over here, because the types are both very creative in their own rights. I think it can work really, really well. I think I have the least issue with kind of boundaries getting blurred with work with INTJs, because they're so good at, because they're such like autonomous thinkers, I think they also really respect and value other people's autonomy. So I find it's like a very nice working relationship in that way. Like I just find they're very clear and very direct, and it's easy from the get-go to kind of understand who's doing what, which I love.
Yeah. So they're clear at assigning like roles to what should be done.
Yeah. Because I work in a lot of kind of creative fields, and my biggest pet peeve is just having a project and it's kind of like you do your part and then someone's like, oh no, I also wanted you to fuse it with this or collaborate with this person on it. Like I hate when things aren't clearly defined and I don't know where I can take liberties and where I can't, just because I feel like it makes it very inefficient. And even as a TE third, that drives me crazy, because when I have like room to fully kind of be creative and take control over a project, that's where I shine. And I find INTJs are really good at defining the boundaries beforehand, where a lot of people in creative fields are not. And I find that INTJs often end up in creative fields kind of organizing the creative types because they're such open-minded people and so good at seeing the big picture. They're really good at working with people like in the arts fields or in any sort of creative profession. And I always love when that's kind of the client that I'm working with. Like I know if I'm working with someone who seems INTJ-ish, there's not going to be a lot of miscommunications or like edits or coming back being like, actually, I wanted it more like this. I just didn't think of it at the time. Like, it's just so nice from beginning to end.
Yeah, they just kind of had a natural understanding of structure. Like when I do videos with Michael, he'll go like, what's the objective? So like he has just a clear understanding of how to get things going and accomplished. And yeah, Michelle, I also really liked your point about like INTJs, they're good at that singular vision. So that can really help like hone in all of the multiple ideas that you have. And yeah, with Michael and the like saying the truth, like INTJs when they tell the truth, you know, and what Michelle was talking about. There was an experience I had where I was designing the logo for the website I'm going to be releasing. And I sent it to Michael, and Michael was like, don't use this. And he was like honest about it. No one else was being honest with me except the thinkers in my life. Like I sent the logo to both feelers and thinkers, and the feelers were like, it's good. And then they send me revisions of the logo. So they clearly do not think it's good because they made their own version to go like, you should use this instead, but they didn't tell me it was bad. But then like Michael, the INTJ, and my INTP friend too, he was like, you know, you're better off not using this logo. And then Michael gave a really fine critique of the logo. And I was like, that was really helpful because when thinkers are honest about like the reality of the situation, they don't sugarcoat things. And that lets you like improve more quickly because then you're dealing with the reality. And so I appreciate their honesty.
One thing that really surprised me when I first got into type and like learning more about ENFPs, because I'd known many, I just never like had language to put to like the behavior, is that they're really good at TE, and they find TE like kind of delightful too. So if a project is meaningful, then you get really like good work from ENFPs and INFPs too. Like really good. I've been staggered sometimes about like, you know, I feel that way about FI too, though. I feel like I'm better at it than I am, but I don't know.
Well,
tangent.
It's interesting that you bring that up because I was thinking one of the things I like about ENFPs is even if they're not like naturally inclined towards being the best at extroverted thinking, if you stop them and go, hey, like here are the extroverted thinking reasons why I think you should do this thing, they're usually willing to listen. And like that's really something that I think is a valuable thing for the communication there, because you can at least find the middle ground in getting stuff done.
Yeah, I think one thing that, I mean, I work with a lot of ENFPs in my professional job, and I am a creative director, so it does make sense that what you were saying, Heidi. But one thing that I really find is that they'll come up with the ideas like one after the other, and then where I see my role being important is I'm using like the projection with the NI, but then also the TE to say like, that's a great idea, but you know, we wouldn't have the amount of staff to accommodate that kind of idea right now based off like how things currently are, you know, or, you know, that's a great idea. And like, it could be like the best idea ever, but, you know, in 3 months, like we're going to have less of this resource. And so if we were to implement that now, we wouldn't be able to do this, And so it really is such a natural complement, but the integration is where I see, and that's just like that TE, just like one notch above. But like, we're always thinking on the integration. How will this integrate with how things will be? And, but they complement each other well, so.
That's a really good point, Lindsay. It's like the INTJ's realism goes really well with the ENFP's optimism with ideas, because the TE of the INTJ is like, and the NI is like, this is what you can accomplish with the resources that you have at your disposal. And the ENFP, it grounds them, because then they know.
Yeah, it's like because FI and TE are both kind of more conscious functions for both of the types, I think that both appreciate the other one kind of bringing it up in situations where, like, because being an ENFP, you'll think about the TE things, but not for very long, and you won't factor it in very heavily or weigh it very heavily. And I think the same could be true for FI, for INTJs. And I actually feel the same way. Like, Michael, you were saying you're surprised with the grasp that ENFPs tend to have on TE. I feel the same way about INTJs with FI. Like, there's a stereotype on the internet where INTJs, sorry, I have a pop up here. INTJs are kind of these like cruel, cold-hearted people, and I'm like, my INTJ friends are much better people than me. Like, period, full stop. Because having that function third, I think we always kind of idealize our third function a little bit, so we put a lot of conscious work and effort into it, and I really see that with at least the INTJs in my life, which just makes it a natural complement, because I think ENFPs really want to develop their TE, INTJs really want to develop their FI most of the time. So we can really appreciate those things in each other.
That is so true. And because INTJs, some of them tend to be like really FI-ish, like it can cause them to mistype as INFJ initially. So Michael actually scores INFJ on the MBTI. And Michelle's boyfriend, who's an INTJ, used to think he was an INFJ for a while too. Yeah. So it happens because of that idealization of the third function. But you know that they're INTJs because blind spot FE.
Yeah, I mistyped on and this is the official instrument too, twice, two different jobs, INFJ.
But that's close. It's like 3 out of 4 letters. It's like, but the cognitive functions are far away. But I would say any test can get you wrong. But like, I would say 3 out of 4 ain't bad if there's a human person to calibrate after the result. So, but I can see like it still isn't, like tests are never just enough, but they're a starting place.
It depends which 3, right? You get that 4th letter wrong and you just threw your whole function stack into.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is like, there's no substitute for a trained eye in it. Like tests, they can't factor in how you are, your being. But yeah.
I think that's why they designed the MBTI instrument to be taken and then reviewed with a practitioner, unlike a lot of other personality assessments.
The instrument is meant to be taken with a practitioner to review it with you after, in case they have to make revisions for your results. So, love, INTJs and ENFPs in the realm of love. What are your thoughts, INTJs?
I'm legally obliged to say that ENFJs are the best type because my wife's an ENFJ. But, other than that, ENFPs are actually, I think they're probably a very compatible type with INTJs. It's one of those relationships where I feel like it would be really pleasant. There would be a lot of interesting conversation, but I'm not sure if it would be the best for me individually long term. Because I almost like having like an EJ who can kind of manage the outer world a little more for me, because I'm very ignorant when it comes to like keeping my house in check, watching for details, all of that. And having an EJ for me is very nice. And I know EPs can struggle with a little bit of the organization skills as well. So
I do feel like it's the best match. It has been for me. I mean, I've always had like very like a lot of openness and just not any, I can't think of like really bad times with ENFPs I've dated, and they've all ended with something like, oh, you moved to France. Bon voyage. I mean, you know what I mean?
It's hard to make long-term NI plans with NEs long-term. And I think that's the biggest risk factor for that relationship, is that ENFPs love to change and INTJs do not like to change that much.
In terms of the ENFP relationship that I've been in, I think what's really, there's the whole part of like, we've never really argued. Like, we don't argue. I feel like I've seen other, couples like and stuff like that argue, because our concern, like, even though we'll disagree with things, there's never that piece of contention that I think can sometimes happen with other types. So that part just makes it easy. And then there's the part of like, if you're dating someone with FI, it's like, if they love you, like, they don't need a reason. Like, and that's always like so interesting whenever I'm looking at FI. It's like, FI doesn't need a reason to be like, I love that thing over there. That is mine, And I think as INTJs, like, just like the fact that someone can be so like attached to something without like any conditions placed on it. And it's like, I aspire to be like that in so many ways, but I also feel as though like I see humans as very like functional things like within the world, and ENFPs just don't have that the same way, I feel like. But because even when as an INTJ you're like, well, I'm not doing something that's really working as well as I would like it to, you know, maybe I don't feel as good about the state that I'm in because I want to be doing something, you know, at my standard, whatever it is, higher. The ENFP is just like, yeah, okay, whatever, like I still love you anyway, you know? And I think that's something that really is healthy for us.
My older ENFP sister's actually in a relationship with an INTJ. So it's funny how that pair does tend to just end up together a lot of the time.
I want to hear more about this repulsion switch. That's new to me. Like, what is?
FI, it wants its values internally to match with its environment externally. So when the environment is not reflecting its values, sometimes there's the urge to just burn down the bridge or burn down that. So that's the repulsion switch. It's like this automatic boom out. and so question, Michelle, you have an INTJ boo, so I was wondering about that.
Well, it's actually kind of interesting because, you know, as an ENFP, it's very hard to get, I mean, like, I feel like a lot of ENFPs do struggle with long-term relationships, but I think that with, at least in our particular relationship, what we do is we explore the idea of doing something different often. So like we explore what would happen if we decided to do X, Y, and Z instead of what we're doing right now. And so we have a lot of those kinds of conversations regularly. And when we don't have them is when our stress levels tend to build up and we start like getting upset with each other more easily. But we found that like if we just talk about what could happen if we did whatever it is, and like maybe we're moving, or maybe like we're not having enough communication or whatever it is, we're like, well, we could do this and this and this would be the consequence, or we could do this and this and this would be the consequence. And, you know, this is what I want to do more. But also, I don't know if this is just me, but sometimes I'm not sure what I do want more than the other thing. And sometimes I can be a little impulsive thinking that I want one thing when I want another after I've had time to think about it. So the INTJ creates a rock, so to speak, that I could come back to when I'm done like being crazy and emotional.
I wonder with like ENFPs, maybe they have to experience it first to know how they feel. And so they have to go through it to then know how they feel. And then they might change their mind once they go through it. And so with a judger, like an INTJ, they might go like, well, don't you know, like off the hand, like at the beginning. So, but the ENFP is more trial and error by the nature of being like a perceiver.
Yeah, I feel like I could see it working best. Like I've never been in a long-term relationship with an INTJ, so I don't know from firsthand, but I could see it working the best in a relationship where both people are very comfortable with a lot of space, which I think, again, can be a natural benefit of both of those types because they both are very independent. Because I totally agree that I just see myself and my lifestyle driving an NI user a little crazy. Not because they wouldn't appreciate it, but because it would be very hard to plan things, and NI users are planners. And I have trouble making long-term plans that I actually stick to. But I think every time like I speak with an INTJ, weirdly, I'm like, I could totally be around someone like this forever. Like just the natural connection is so easy. I think the only thing that I would anticipate getting in the way would be like just differences in lifestyle.
That's why I always say that like ENFPs are like my favorite type to have as a friend. And I'm not sure that I as an individual would want to make a long-term relationship the thing, but certainly they are one of my like top two, if not my favorite type to have as a friend.
They are a great type. And so Heidi, well, you talked about long-term planning. There's actually like a saying about judgers and perceivers. So judgers, how they view time is like there's a series of short moments in a long moment. So the reason why like they long-term plan is because they see like each moment as a small moment in a long timeline. Whereas perceivers naturally see each moment as an individual moment. So they're more planning as they go. And so with ENFPs, like in the group chat today when we were planning for this event, both the ENFPs were like, it wasn't Michelle. Michelle came here because I gave her a 10-minute notice. So like, hey, you want to join this panel? And she's really good at adapting. So kudos to you, Michelle. I really appreciate you showing up. So with the conversation, the two ENFPs were like, oh yeah, the panel today. I almost forgot. And it made me realize how ENFPs take things day by day. So they're like, I just remembered what I had to do today because I was taking it day by day. And I was like, a judger would find that like foreign language. It's like, well, I might have not been thinking about it until it's happening, but it's always been in the planner inside my understanding of the long-term moment. With judgers and perceivers, there can be that difference with how you view, like judgers view it as a long moment with a series of short moments, but like perceivers with each individual moment. I don't know, that was too abstract, but maybe like
no, I think that's 100% correct, and I think that tends to be the source of most of our arguments. Like if we have an argument, it's because I haven't thought something through well enough, and he's just like, how, like he's not mad at me. He's mad at the fact that like I completely didn't notice, and like it's a recurring pattern that he can't do anything about. That's just how I am, and I can't fix that about myself. And so like he knows that and he's aware of that, but still there are times when that just like he can't comprehend how I can possibly like not think things through long enough. It's funny.
Yeah, I have to say like a subtle difference that I would point out. For me, actually, the reason I forgot about this meeting was because I didn't have it on my calendar, and I'm like super like I visualize my calendar every day. So if something's not on it, I forget about it. But I think like ENFPs aren't actually, or maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but aren't as bad with time as maybe we're kind of stereotyped to be, because we have SI. So it's like we're not existing as in the moment as I think people think we're existing in, but we just don't plan long term. Like I kind of have my whole week always planned out, and I know how much room I have for creative freedom and how much of it is structured. But I don't want to know what's happening 5 years from now. Like I just don't want to know that. So it's like I'm kind of moving. I can move through time in a very organized way if it's short term, but I like to have like the feeling of open-ended plans is so comforting to me, and the feeling that I could take things in so many different directions. So I'd say it could be even more related to just having FI and being like, I need to know that if I feel a certain way in the future, I can act on it right away, because that's like what makes me feel the most alive. And just having that option gone is very stressful, which I think can also be a funny thing between INTJs and ENFPs, because they can kind of look at our patterns and be like, well, you're probably not going to want X, Y, or Z. And we can even know that they're probably right, but like we want the option to want to do it if we want it. So it's like, it can probably be a frustrating dynamic. It's like they're right, but we need the mental space to be open anyways.
That's really interesting that you say that, because that it relates to an interview with Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'm not sure what type he is, but a lot of people say he's an Enneagram, where he's talking about targeted ads, and he says something along the lines of, I don't like targeted ads because it takes away the possibility of me experiencing something that I didn't know I wanted.
Yeah.
And I thought that kind of related to what you said there, where it's like they want the option to be able to experience these new things, whereas the targeted ad is more like, yeah, you'll probably want this thing, like this is most likely what you'll buy. But
I like that.
I like having I like things being open-ended and having options. If I plan for things to be open-ended and to have options, if I have like spontaneously just an open weekend, then like I inevitably, it comes to the end of the weekend and I say I have accomplished absolutely nothing. It doesn't matter what I've done. It's like because there was no foresight to that, So yeah, I do. I mean, I'm happy to be spontaneous if I'm like, okay, we're going to be spontaneous.
Planned spontaneity.
September. September is going to be the month of spontaneity, leaving the calendar entirely open.
Isn't that an oxymoron?
100%
Having the word planned and spontaneity in the same thing. Oxymoron.
I mean, I know for myself, I really did have to, at points in my life, like put in that structure to have like, okay, I have half a day that's free. Like I have a half a day of unplanned things to do. And, my pattern was not giving myself that time. And I feel like it really did not support my own creativity. And really, it didn't support my own FI at all. And I was finding that I was becoming like creatively dull. I wasn't like, my ideas weren't coming to me the way that I wanted them to. And it was just really because I wasn't giving myself enough free space to rest. And by doing that, I feel like it really does give the FI kind of what it needs. And also it feeds into RSE as well to, you know, take in some new things in reality that we weren't planning on taking in necessarily, we weren't expecting on such a literal basis. And that can really, it can really help support creativity as well too.
That's really interesting. It's got me thinking about like how different types define purpose. So like as an NI dom, and what I see in some INTJs in my life is that purpose is developed by incorporating it in a long-term scheme. So with the INTJ, I might be broadly generalizing because I'm not an INTJ. What I see them doing is when they create something long-term, it's infused with a purpose. So I wonder if they ever have a hard time understanding an ENFP's purpose, if it's a different type of purpose than that natural long-term. INTJs might be resistant to change because it's almost like taking out the purpose of something, because if you keep changing frequently, it's like you're taking out all the long-term intentions of that thing, because then you're not working towards a long-term intention. So, but there's a type of purposefulness of just constant change too. And so the vague concept I'm trying to say is that like the reason why like IJs don't want to change so frequently is because if you do that, you lose the purpose of going down that singular path, because then you don't know what you're working towards anymore. But with the ENFP, they're working towards something in the frame of the ENFP and what they find important. If the INTJ doesn't understand that, they might not know what's happening. So they might be afraid of that change. This is like a really abstract notion. What are your all thoughts on it?
So I think with introverted intuitive dominance, and specifically the types with NI, they view their little introverted intuitive perception, their goal, as like their child and their little baby. And if you want to mess with that and take away the parts, it no longer is their view. And that's, I think, stressful for the INTJ at least. I don't know how, and that's interesting. I don't know how exactly how the ENFP would view that, their extroverted intuition. But I know for me specifically, when I'm doing something related to my goal, if someone else changed it too much, even if in a way that like is actively bad, and there's points where I will win over the TE, I'll want to follow through because it's my vision, if that makes sense. Like sorry if I was lagging there. I saw the video cut out.
I couldn't agree anymore with you, Chris. Like with projects I'm involved in, I will literally call them like my baby. Like, and it's really like only one, but it's like, you know, and I protect it as if it were a real child. Like I am tuned into it, like all of these components of it as if it were like a real living being. Like it is the baby, you know? And so it's funny to hear you say that, because, and then people who know me as well, they're like, yeah, like that's her child. Like that's why she's like that. And so yeah, I'm in total agreement.
That NITE baby.
So how is that for the ENFPs? I'm curious. Like when you're working on something in the creative realm, how attached are you to your intuitions, I guess?
That's funny because for me, I call projects my babies too. Like, so I actually really relate to that. I'm probably a more chaotic parent than the INTJ, but I love the feeling of when I'm working on something and it's just in those really intense days where it's like I eat, sleep, and breathe this project. Like I'm waking up super early, like just everything is going into it. I really love the intensity of that. But it's definitely a more chaotic approach than the one that the NI Dom takes, where it's like, it's more about orchestrating things in a way where everything comes together really seamlessly. For me, it's more about kind of tuning into the energy of like, okay, how is this going day by day? And then responding to that and refining and like adding things to it. Like I'm running a 6-week course for ENFPs right now. And like, based on the feedback I'm getting, I'm just scrapping entire weeks and like redoing a week of video content, like on the fly. And I love that. Like, it's very fun and energizing to do it that way. But yeah, it's funny because it's like a similar feeling, but I think a different approach.
I get to that place. Where it's like I eat, sleep, and breathe a project, which basically means I don't really eat and sleep and breathe very rapidly. Like I'm working on something now that I've been up till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning every night this week working on, and I have like so much energy. I know that as soon as I'm done with it, I'm going to absolutely crash out for maybe 2 weeks. But when I'm in that zone, I sit there and I think to myself, like, man, is this how ENFPs feel all the time? Because like,
I would definitely say I'm constantly seeking something that takes up all of my thoughts. I have a few longer term goals and then some shorter term goals, but I would say, like, for me, purpose is a much more like abstract thing. So it's like a general, like, I want to do this kind of thing, and it doesn't matter how I manifest this kind of thing, so long as I get this across, like, this is what I want, and however it has to happen to get there. And I think that's why I like INTJ feedback, because for me, it doesn't really matter how it's done, so long as it is done. Yeah.
Ironically, one of the best articulations of ENFPs and purpose that I ever heard was voiced by an INTJ. So Mario Nardi one time said that the ENFPs kind of life purpose is to create better traditions. So they have to kind of go out and sample everything with NE, and kind of almost like life is like this giant sampler platter, because they don't inherently buy into the traditions that they were born into or that already exist in the world. And then afterwards, after they've sampled everything, they're kind of like, okay, here's the ones that work. Like, here's the ones I keep coming back to that make the most sense to me or that feel the best. And I think that's very, like, I really resonated with that in the way that I approach life. Because it's very much about, like, purpose for me gets constructed in retrospect. So it's like, I want to go follow whatever I'm feeling, have a lot of different experiences, pursue whatever I want to pursue. And then afterwards, I can kind of absorb it and digest it and go, here's what felt the best. Here's what I would repeat. Here's what I wouldn't. Here's what clicks with other things that I've tried. And it really is about kind of constructing that purpose in retrospect, for me at least.
And I think this all plays into the whole fact of, you know, we're okay with each other vanishing for long periods of time, because this is literally what we're talking about on both sides. So it's like, you know, when the ENFP goes into their, you know, wild creative space of, you know, whatever they're doing, and like when I go into mine, it's just like mutually understood that we're going into that abstract place, and we'll be out whenever we're done.
Yeah, you both are attending to your creative children, so your babies, as you guys put it. I find with people on the FI-TE axis, they are more likely to view the projects that they put themselves into as like babies, because there's an FI baby in that. Like, there's some sort of emotion, like it's yours.
Yeah, I think, like, to have FI, you kind of see the things you do in some ways as an extension of the self, almost unconsciously. So I definitely see that being more common for people on the FI-TE in either direction axis than people on FETI.
Yeah, I guess that brings us to our next topic, stereotypes. And so, INTJs, would you like to take it away?
I mean, there's like I don't know what else to call it, but it was a thing like 10 years ago, the like manic pixie dream girl kind of stereotype of an ENFP from like Cameron Crowe movies and stuff. And it's for me, it's just an extremely obnoxious thing. And I never found that ENFPs, I can see that maybe from afar, you could get that impression, but like every ENFP I've known, like that's really like hasn't been the case. And there's also, I've found like a lot of like darkness in ENFPs that I like. So which I don't think surfaces a lot when you see, you know, memes about, you know, somebody chasing butterflies and rainbows and everything.
There's this ENFP guidebook that I saw, and they called ENFPs the existential teddy bears. I don't know if you guys relate or don't relate to that.
I do.
It's true though. Yeah. ENFPs have a really strong capacity for darkness. I tend to see them like show it to people they tend to trust though. So from the outside, if they're not trying to like outwardly project it at every moment, so you might not know that that's there, but they are so emotionally deep, and they just they hold that spot for the people who they think might understand it, because it's like not given willy-nilly, because so they have that incredible well of holding space for that dark emotion.
I think that's the thing about FI, is that everything is in there, right? And there's something that in those second and third slots, there's like, we're very conscious of those things. And I feel like, I don't know if you guys agree, but I feel like we're our types, people tend to come to us with their darkness too. You know what I mean? So like, I think that's a similarity between the two.
Yeah, I think it's actually funny because it's almost ironic in that INTJs are one of the quickest types to kind of get all the parts of me when I'm talking to them. Like they don't put me right in one category right away. I kind of feel like I'm being seen very holistically in a way that isn't common. And because of that, it's almost like my playfulness comes out extra around them. Because I find with INTJs, like there is a definite sense of lightheartedness and playfulness and kind of intellectual curiosity and fun to the ENFP. And the INTJ tends to bring that out in us very easily. But it's because they're not trying to fit us in any box. So it's almost like this thing where you can kind of breathe, like relax, and know that just because you're being playful and fun, they're not misinterpreting that as shallowness or whatever. And you can, like, there's a shared dark humor, I think, a lot of the time.
Yes.
You have to use INTJs, which is fun.
I was going to bring that up right after you finished, actually. I think one of the things I like about ENFPs is a lot like INFPs, they do tend to have kind of like those very deep emotions to them. But, you know, ENFPs, instead of wearing it as like a primary identifier of who they are, they almost joke about it, I think, a little. And I think that is the thing that the INTJ can handle. Because I've seen ENFPs a lot of times, they'll like make some like really dark emotional joke and everyone else will be like, yeesh. And then the INTJs are just like, you know, like yeah.
Yeah. I think what's great about, you know, being around the ENFPs with their FI is that I, as an INTJ, will feel as though like I'm all of a sudden given permission to use my FI in a situation. Like, whereas other times I'll kind of like subconsciously rationalize, like, you know, this doesn't make sense here to be like using this function as much, you know, whatever. But the ENFPs are just so free and open with, you know, what they love and what they enjoy. And it's like that energy that they bring into the situation. It's like, I feel as though that it gives me permission to be like, oh yeah, I can talk about something that I enjoy right now. Like it, you know, and they create that space where it's okay to enter, you know, from someone who might not use that function quite as easily. And I think we also admire it in them too, because I'm like, wow, look at them like freely using their FI however they like to. You know, it's like, well, I can do that now too. All right.
Yeah, and in that way, like ENFPs help INTJs like loosen up. Maybe like they help the INTJ be less serious and maybe lighten themselves up. And it seems like some people see ENFPs one-dimensionally, which is false. And so what INTJs provide is like INTJs are able to see the multi-dimensionality of ENFPs because they are able to infer that FI, and there's some sort of mutual understanding there. Yeah.
So what do the ENFPs think of like the INTJ stereotypes?
I'm always curious about who's coming up with them, because I'm like, I look at them and I'm like, have the people who are saying this ever met an INTJ? Or is it INTJs themselves perpetuating this? But that idea of INTJs as this kind of cold robotic type, I'm like, I just don't see it at all. I see them as one of the deepest types in every facet of the word. And that means having space for like a lot of emotion. Maybe it's not right on the surface all the time. And maybe I'm biased because the nature of our dynamic kind of pulls the FI out of the INTJ a little bit more. So maybe we see it more often. But if anything, I see INTJs as people who approach that introverted feeling in a very measured and very deliberate way, which I really admire. So I feel like I have yet to meet an INTJ who kind of matches the stereotypes on the internet. I could see it, like I could see it as a very unhealthy expression. Maybe of an INTJ who's very consciously rejecting their FI, but I have yet to meet an INTJ who I think actually fits that description.
Yeah, consciously rejecting and also very deep in it too. Very too deep in the FI. Sorry, Michelle.
No, it's actually, I was going to bring up, I had a coworker that I worked with that's and he was an INTJ and he really felt like like he wasn't valued where he was working. And he never talked about those feelings and that fact, but he would just be like super cold to people and super blunt and just direct and saying, this is what you need to do, and not answering any of their questions and all that stuff. And he would like leave a lot of things for them to complete, even though he was supposed to do it, because he's like, oh, I did exactly what they asked me. And like, I don't know. It's just like he was very much so a stereotype, because like he would not address that underlying feeling of, I don't know, maybe he was like feeling shameful that he would not be valued, even though he brought a lot of value and they put him in the position because of the initial value. But I really wish that he had like dealt with that FI, because I think things would have ended a lot better if he had just dealt with that. And admitted that was going on, because anytime I would ask, you know, like, hey, what's going on? Like, it seems like you're upset with these people. He would never want to talk about it, but he would talk about other things with me, like other things that he was upset about, like personal things and, you know, stuff like that, or like the state of the world, whatever we were talking about. But when it came to the work relationship, he wouldn't talk about that at all. It was like a weird, sensitive point that he just wouldn't speak of.
I wonder if that could be, and the INTJs could probably speak more directly to this, but that could even be a lack of awareness. Like I remember I had an INTJ coworker years ago who would, like, I would see them kind of get in that headspace sometimes, but I could just ask them, like, why are you being such an asshole today? And then they would kind of stop and think about it and come up with like actually a lot of awareness around it. But I wonder if, because the FI is tertiary the same way with us with TE, we sometimes have to think about how we're going to do something. I wonder if it's just like a lack of awareness of even why he's feeling that way in the first place.
I mean, I know for myself, like I was never someone, and I'm not someone who goes out of my way for like socially kind of, I don't want to say like acceptable, but like I don't go out of my way for pleasantries like in social dynamics, and I never have. And so I know that in the past, whereas like, you know, I'm a friendly person, like if you get to talk to me and know me and, you know, whatever, but it's like, I'm not going to be that person who, if I'm with someone and they're having a conversation with you, I'm not going to go and introduce myself, or I'm not going to go and like, you know, do this social kind of what I feel is like the normal FB thing to do in an interaction. And so, whereas like I feel the ENFPs, it's like, that kind of goes like right past them. They're not concerned at looking at that. They're like, you know, if I might not do the social norm thing, they can just go and be like, okay, so like, tell me more about you. Or like, they'll come and try to like pull my FI out somehow. Whereas I think other types don't necessarily do that the same way. And so, whereas I've never thought I've come across as like cold or anything like that. Sometimes years later, I've gotten to know someone better and they're like, you know what, back in college, they're like, I thought you were a total asshole. And I was like, we didn't even talk to each other. And they're like, yeah, I know. Like, that's why, like, you never like said anything to me or whatever. And I just remember being so shocked that just because like I didn't engage in certain ways that were maybe more, you know, acceptable to people, that's kind of where that stereotype maybe came. But I just don't feel like the ENFPs see that at all. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, INTJs tend to have a certain kind of face, and ENFPs with that lower SI, it's like they just blow right through that, you know, because I've had that too, Lindsay, where people are like, you know, I thought you were a jerk, just because like I'm kind of stone faced and there's nothing I can do about it. You know what I mean? But really, I mean, I just want to, honestly, if I'm being honest, I just want to be like a total goofball. And it's like ENFPs are the best at sort of, you know, allowing space for that. Or not allowing space, but like really like throwing it at you. You know?
Yeah. Well, that's actually funny, because that does break the stereotype of an INTJ, but Tim's exactly the same way. Like, he really likes to be very silly, and we always like try to out silly each other sometimes.
I think there's a similar sense of humor.
Running away.
Just like the INTJ, I like the ENFP so much, is that for the INTJs, the intuition is very private. So unless they feel like they can comfortably share that eccentricity with somebody, they're not going to want to. And when I talk to ENFPs, they start acting like almost like how I feel on the inside sometimes, where I'm like, yeah, I am kind of eccentric on the inside. I am a bit of a weirdo, and I like to be like that, but I don't want that to be presented to the world. That's just something that I want to be presented to very select few people who get to know me.
Where does that INTJ privateness come from?
I mean, as an introverted type, it's certainly going to be there, but I think the just NI and FI together maybe might even make it more so of like a privacy thing, at least on the feeling side of things, or how you're going to be perceived by people in general.
I think it's also like the SF at the bottom of our stack too, because it's like I can view from an outside perspective like how these normal human things work and like how normal human things happen in life. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to go try to do that. Like, I'm going to try to land my plane down to reality, but it feels like an uncomfortable transition sometimes. And that, that introverted space of like, okay, I'm comfortable in this removed place of my own self. It just feels more comfortable because I'm not having to deal with the SF and I'm not having to play the human game the way that I can observe that it's, being played. And that's probably a lot of my own like perception as well. But that's kind of how it's felt for me before.
Here's maybe a small hypothesis for the privateness. Is it like because you guys are so like emotionally like that well of emotion is so powerful within you, or it's like the FI is so personal but strong. It can be kind of vulnerable to share with other people. So it's a kind of like there's an initial privateness.
Yeah, and there's the TE above it too, which is like what's the purpose of this? And I feel like with FI, I work things out myself emotionally. Generally, I don't feel a need to work it out through someone else. So like that'll end up in a situation where someone's like, why aren't you grieving? Are you like, is something, you know what I mean? And it's like, honestly, like I'm sorting it out, you know what I mean? So that's a part of it too. And there's just, we tend to have terrible FE in general. So like it gets better as we get older, as do a lot of things. And I feel like our two types really do converge like as we grow up and out of some of those things. But you can get stuck in an NI-FI loop that's like I've been there, and it's just this grind. So it works the other way too. But I found that the way out of that also wasn't talking it through other people. And it's like obviously something was wrong, and like people are trying to like shake you out of it. But it's like I really need to work through this myself.
I actually really relate to that as well as an ENFP. Like even having FI auxiliary, I don't need to talk out like my deeper emotions. I like to kind of talk out like the fun, exciting stuff. But when it comes to what's actually wrong and what actually needs to be processed deeply, I'm perfectly comfortable doing that on my own and actually like really appreciate when people respect that and give me the space I need to do that. And I find that INTJs tend to have a natural understanding of that. And they're one of the types that understands when you say like, I just need some space, they actually give it to you. And they kind of like, there's kind of a mutual understanding there just naturally, at least from my experience.
That is so true, where the INTJ is able to, like both the ENFP and the INTJ are able to hold emotional space for each other because they understand each other's emotional process because there's that overlapping. Yeah. So thank you for the chat, everyone, today. I really enjoyed hearing your perspectives. You INTJs are really, really like intellectual, goofy, and just very, very cool YouTubers. And Michael is an upcoming YouTuber too. So thank you for making great YouTube content. You really add to everyone's lives with it. And you guys put out more accurate INTJ takes because you guys understand your inner process so well. And I just really appreciate all of the material you guys put out. And I like how like INTJs are initially like, they have the INTJ stare, but as you get to know them, they have such a multi-dimensional personality. And the ENFP is really able to draw that out of them. And I like that dynamic where the introvert just needs that extrovert to like pull out their inners. And you guys really represent INTJs well. I bet INTJs, when they watch your content, they feel solidarity because they're like, wow, INTJ content I can actually relate to. These people are the real deal. So thank you for being the real deal, INTJs. And thank you, ENFPs, for showing up today and giving us your ENFP perspective. You guys like show how bright ENFPs are and how well they can understand the human mind, because you had very nuanced takes on the INTJ personality, which really shows the intellectual center of ENFPs. And I really like your free spirits. It brings like a lively energy to whatever you participate in. And Michelle has a YouTube channel too called Heart of Michi. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And she has really, really interesting content. And Heidi has great books like This Is Me Letting You Go. A reminder, if you want to cry, if you want to FI process out your emotions, highly recommend crying to this book. So yeah, thank you, you YouTubers, for coming out, sharing your hot takes. Thank you for leveling up the type knowledge of the type sphere. You're doing a service to the community and a service to this whole endeavor as a whole. So thank you for adding your sparkles to the thing that is type. Thank you.
Thanks, Joyce, for having us. You've been a great host again.
It was a pleasure.
It was nice talking to y'all, and I'll see everyone.
It was a good conversation.
Agreed.
Yeah, and so we'll see you all next week. Bye, y'all.
Bye.